Hey, Luca here. Today we're going to be building an old school house track from scratch. It'll be the one that you're hearing in the background at the moment, and then we're going to be talking a little bit about how you should be thinking when we're trying to make this old school style music. If you want some free music production resources, definitely go check out the free downloads page in the description. Otherwise, let's have a listen to the finished product and then jump into the build. First things first, if you want to follow along with me, go download the sample pack that I have put in the description. It's this heavy old school house sample pack. It's just the samples that I'm going to be using in this video, so you can make your own track or follow along and make the same track as me if you want to. Now, it's worth me touching on a few concepts that we're going to be thinking about when we're creating this track, and that's old school and hardware. Hardware imposes a lot of limitations that we don't encounter when we're using a DAW, and that is things like complex transitions don't really exist when you're doing live arrangements with hardware. Also, things like emulating the sound design of hardware and that analog warmth we're going to be doing all throughout this track. I'm going to be talking about these techniques as we come across them, but just keep in mind, we don't want to do anything too complex. We want it to be simplistic. We want this track to be minimalistic and lush and really warm. So I'm going to be aiming for all of those things as I'm doing this, but let's get stuck into it. So I'm going to be using this analog kick in the sample pack, which I designed on this guy right here, which is an analog drum machine. It sounds like this. It's really intentionally large. I'll put it onto one shot mode and decrease the tail of it a little bit. It is large, like I said, on purpose, so you can get those really big kick drum effects if you want to, but in this case I'm just going to shorten it a little bit so that we have a bit more room for the low frequencies in the bass as well. Let's put in the clap and the open hat as well. Clap there, and the open hat is just a 909. It already has a bit of distortion on it. It's quite squashed already. What I'm going to do in this case is duplicate this open hat and rename this one open hat 1 and this one open hat 2, and then I'm going to turn this one off and go into the simpler device here and turn the sustain down, and that is going to create two different open hats which I can change between. And this one is going to be a little bit more snappy, and this one's going to be much more open and more energetic. And we're going to use this one for when we want more energy in a drop section. So here is what they sound like. Because they're the same hat, we're not going to play them at the same time, but we're going to replace them instead. So next, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to saturate the drums now, and I'm just going to group these three elements, not this second open hat, because I don't want to completely destroy that open hat. It already has a little bit of saturation to it as is, and I'm going to name this group saturation and go into my audio effects and find the saturator device and then crank this now. And so if we crank the drive up and put the output down, this is going to be saturated already. And that's a good thing because I want to be making the track into the saturator. This is going to create a really cohesive sort of pumping, warm feel from the get-go, and it's going to change how I design the sounds as well. So I want to be designing into the saturator in this case. It's just a technique that I'm using in this particular track. Now you'll notice that as we change the volume of the elements, they'll become more saturated. So if the more I turn up this clap, it gets louder a little bit, but it just gets more saturated as well. So let's add a few more drum elements. Let's have a look in the sample pack, and let's go for a closed hat here and add some sort of shuffly syncopation. I'm just going to place a few notes just around the open hat And I'm also going to swing these by hand. Now, swinging by hand rather than using a groove template is a nice technique in this particular case for this track. I usually use the groove templates, but swinging by hand, it's not going to be perfect. Everything's going to be a little bit different, and you're just going to be doing it by ear. And that is old school hardware technique number one. Do things by ear and make them a little bit messy, a little bit loose. That's a good thing in this type of music. Also with the velocity, I'm just going to play with these a little bit, duplicate it over and change them a bit more, and have a listen. I'm also going to bring back the decay and the sustain from this as well. I've also included some maracas here, and what I'm going to do in this case is go into my drum rack. I'm just going to pull these maracas into the drum rack and then trigger them with a similar rhythm to this closed hat here. But we're going to be swinging by hand, so things are going to be a little bit different, but we still want it to work together. So let's put all the swung ones in first this time. This one, these four, and then sort of just shorten the start from them. And then let's just move them around. And then we can play with the velocity again as well. So I'm holding command here, and I can just click on the note and drag up and down and play with the velocity. We could even move some of them a little bit forward. So the maracas just add to that groove a little bit, and they also soften the hats as well. Next up, just a bit of syncopation, and then we're going to move into the bass. This one is going to be the low tom, and I love how the low tom feels in this old school style house. I'm just going to make a 1 bar MIDI clip, and in 1 bar we have 4 beats, and in the second beat I'm in 16th notes here, and if I go to the 4th 16th note of the second beat, I'm going to place one there. I'm also going to place one here, which is on the same spot as the clap and the kick drum. It's going to sound like this. I'm just going to play it with the kick drum because these are both sort of low end elements, and then just make sure that they're not fighting too much here. So I'm just going to shorten this low tom so it doesn't ring out too much. And I can afford to turn it up a bit as well. Remember, the more I turn it up, the more it's going to get distorted by the saturator. Around about there is nice. And then for my last element, I'm going to put the snare in here, and this is just a classic 909 snare. I love the sound of this snare, and it has a really old school feel. So this one is going to be a 2 bar MIDI clip this time, I think. I'm going to place some notes just to make a little sort of variation shuffle fill at the end of the 2 bars. So far so good. Believe it or not, that is it for the drums. I'm going to move on to the bass now. I can delete this track and go over to the lately bass. Now this is a classic bass preset from a old school, like vintage Yamaha synthesizer. So for this track, I'm just going to be using a simpler device and pitching it up and down, and that works okay in this case, but keep in mind it does degrade the quality of the sample a little bit. So if this doesn't work for you, there is actually Contact libraries that you can purchase that are multi-samples of this lately bass, so they've sampled every note. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to purchase that, but in this case I think I'll make do with just this sample and make a 1 bar MIDI clip and start plugging in some notes. So let's look for a note that'll work. Sort of starts to get too low down here, so maybe this one. Now I'm going to use more or less a classic old school house rhythm, and it's totally fine to do that, but it's about sort of tweaking them in slightly different ways and making unique flavor, unique feel with it. So this house rhythm goes a little bit like this. If I make an 8th note length note, and I'm going to put it onto 16th notes now. So I'm going to duplicate this note and skip one of these 16th notes in here. So this note is 1/8 note long, and I'm just skipping 1/16th note. And I'm going to do the same thing a few times. So skip, skip, skip. And then on this one, I think I'm going to just make a shorter 16th note one here. And let's have a listen. And then one last one here. I'm just going to duplicate the length of this MIDI clip also. So hit duplicate button. I'm just going to make a small variation, just duplicate this note here so it has a little double note. And I'm also going to shorten some of them and swing them. So I've just kept the first and third note of each bar to be a little bit longer, and then all the other ones are a bit shorter. And I'm just going to swing all the ones that are in the spots that need to be swung. If you're still unsure about how to know which ones need to be swung, then go check out my how to make basic house drums video. So I'm just going to shorten the start of these ones. Is that all of them? Yeah. And then let's have a listen with the bass as well, with the kick, I mean. Great, so now we have the rhythm down, and I'm going to start plugging in the melody. So these 4 ones, I think I'm going to pitch around a little bit so it sort of progresses, the melody progresses a little bit. Yeah, cool, that sounds good. I'm going to duplicate this again, and I think on this last one I'm going to bring it up. Yeah, I'm going to bring it up. How many semitones was that? 1, 2, 3 semitones. So that on the last one here, it just progresses into that 4th bar. So it's a 4-bar melody now. So I'm just going to quickly process this just a little bit with some drum bass, I think. Turn the drive up, maybe a bit of crunch as well. That's nice. One of my favorite little tricks is to put an auto filter on here and just choose one of these analog emulation filter modes and then just boost the drive a bit. I think I might filter this so it's nice to put a filter on early so it's already here, and then the drive also adds a nice little bit of analog sort of saturation. So let's just leave it there for now. I think it's sounding good. I just need a little bit of sidechain because it's going to be clashing with the kick drum, right? So I'm going to go grab a LFO tool, which is what I like to use for my sidechains. And how I like to use this is just bring back this right node a little bit just so it doesn't make any clicks. And there we have it, it's sidechaining. But we're actually losing that initial transient that is playing on the same time as the kick drum, and I want to keep that transient. So if we go to here where it says split and turn on this split, if I bring this slider down, anything above this number here in frequency is not going to be sidechained. So anything below will be. So I just want to sidechain the low end. So you can hear that transient is still coming through. Or the top of the kick drum, the high end, which is nice. So now it's getting out of the way of the kick drum, but we're still keeping that top end transient. And that's what's so great about LFO tool. Now I've included a few chords here that have this really awesome old school characteristic. Feel free to experiment and play with any of them that you like, but I think I'm going to use this one in this case. At the moment, it is a little bit out of key. So I'm going to loop this section and just try and get it into key with my bass line. I might just take out a little bit of low end while I'm here as well. And maybe boost this, maybe a bit of highs as well. I'm going to just pitch this up and down to try and get it in key with the track. So I turn warping off as well. So that sounds good. -3 works. -3 down here works well, and also +2 semitones works well as well. I think +2 sounds a little bit more dreamy, so I'm going to go with that. Let's talk about how we can manipulate samples with old school techniques. So with hardware, this old school sampling technology is really limited. And so I'm not going to be doing anything too crazy, maybe just stretching the samples a little bit and chopping them and bringing them up and down in pitch. I'm not going to be doing anything too modern because I want to stay true to that hardware technique. So maybe I can duplicate this and sort of shorten this one a little bit. Maybe I can bring it here. Let's zoom in a little bit. Extend this out. Maybe we can duplicate this again. I like that feel. I think I'm going to warp this one and stretch it a bit. So this has a slightly different feel from this one because it's playing a little bit longer. I like that. So I'm just going to stretch it so it reaches the end of this bar here. So this is playing for like 1.5 bars. I'm going to duplicate this one over, place it here, and I'm going to warp it and use the complex mode because I'm going to pitch it up 1 octave. So I'm holding shift and hitting the up key, and it's going up 12 semitones from where it was. So now it's in +14, and maybe I can just stretch this back a little bit here as well, and it'll sound like this. So let's copy this over with Command D just a few times, and then do some processing to make it feel a little bit smoother, a little bit less stretched and warped. I'm going to use some chorus. And to give it a bit more movement, some phaser as well. Just turn the amount down, and I want to keep the rate at 2 bars so that the movement goes over the 2 bars. So it's more, feels like more like a 2-bar loop now. I think that sounds cool. I'm going to add some reverb as well. That sounds pretty good to me. I think on the end of this bar, I'm actually going to change this one. So remember how -3 worked, but also +2 semitones worked, and we ended up going with +2 semitones. So I think I want to go back to that -3 just for this last one. So if I click in, to get from +2 to -3 is down 5 semitones, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But to do it all at once, if you highlight them all, go to the pitch here, and then just go down 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll pitch them all down relatively 5 semitones. So I'm also going to make this one just a different color so we know that this is pitched down, and then now it'll have this effect. All right, well, so far we have just used the samples that I've provided in the sample pack, but now I'm going to be using a third-party instrument. It's the Korg M1 instrument, and if you are into this old school house sound, the Korg M1 is a must-have. This is an emulation of a vintage synthesizer from the 90s. This is where so many of those classic old school house sounds came from. For example, it has this classic M1 house organ. That's just a classic tone that you probably recognize. There's also so many presets here that are ready to be explored. I'm just going to be using this Rave M3 hit. It has 2 layers, this one here, and also this one. And it's a minor third interval, so it has this really cool sort of minor feel to it. So I've just renamed and colored this track, and I'm just gonna cut out a little bit of that low end. So put an EQ 8 on there. And then let's have a look and start putting in some notes. Maybe we can make a little chord progression with it. So it seems like C#3 is the note that will work for this track right now. I've made this an 8th note and then extended 1/16 further to like a dotted 8th note. I'm going to do pretty much the same rhythm as the bass line, and that is this, before we were doing this and then skipping a note, but this is just a little bit longer, so I can just duplicate this over. And then when we get to the end here, I'm just going to plug in one last note here just to fill that gap and duplicate it over a bit and do the same thing we did. Just swing the ones that need to be swung. So this one, and this one, around about this. I can actually delete these and duplicate these ones. And now we can start making the melody. And sort of just trying to mimic the bass line here. I think I went up 2. So let's just copy all these notes, and I'm going to duplicate them up, holding Option to, I think, a 5th above, which is this. Let's have a listen. So I think I want to make a slight change here because the bass line changes here in the second one. I think this will work, right? It's just a slight change, but it works. So this one will be good for building tension. I'm also going to select all the notes and make them legato. So make them touching each other. So these two work really nice together, and that is pretty important in this case. And they work well with the bass and the drums as well. It's a little bit too much when they're all playing at once. It feels like they're kind of all fighting for space, but I think I'm just going to use this one to build tension, and then this is going to be my main thing here. Last but not least, I'm going to put in a vocal sample. Okay, so I haven't included the vocal sample in the sample pack, and that's because of copyright issues. This is from a Sample Magic house pack, and it's just like a diva vocal sample like this. That's what it is, and I'm just going to chop it up a little bit. It should fit with the key of my track already. Yeah, it works. Yeah, I'm just going to shorten the end of this a little bit, so just have that first word. I'm going to duplicate it over. I think I'm going to chop a different section for this next one. This one is good. Maybe we could place it. And then we can just copy this over. Remember, be minimalistic, be simple, because this is trying to emulate hardware as well. So I'm just chopping 2 words out and placing them in spots and then just repeating that over and over. I'm going to also put some echo on there. And this echo device is more so trying to emulate the Roland 201 tape space echo, which is a really cool echo device. If you're in a different DAW, there should be some sort of tape delay echo plugin that you can use. And I'm just going to change the where it's echoing a little bit and sort of give it a little bit of a boost around 1K. It's just at dotted eighth notes, which is classic echo as well. So I think that'll probably sound pretty good. Okay, so now let's do some quick arrangement stuff. I'm going to grab everything and move it over a bit, and then bring the bass back over, and sort of the bass and kick and vocals echoing out will make this sort of atmospheric breakdown sort of feel. That sounds pretty good so far. When we go into this section here, I'm just going to do some really simple chops of the drums. Remember, nothing too complex, nothing too fancy, because this is hardware that we're doing. And with hardware stuff, it's really easy to just turn off and on mutes. And this is going to be what I'm trying to emulate, just turning off and on mutes instead of doing any fancy transitions. So something like that is pretty cool. Let's just copy over these vocals here. Also, what I'm going to do with these synths here, to introduce them, I'm actually going to record some filter automation by hand. So remember, if we're doing this on hardware, we're going to have to be doing all the filter movements by hand, and you can definitely tell when someone's doing it by hand and feeling it versus when someone's just drawn a line. So let's put in those filter movements. Maybe I could copy this one over and add some filters to these. Auto filter on this one and on this one. And let's filter this one in first. So to set up this for automation, I want to make sure this red button is turned off and make sure this automation arm is turned on. And then I can just hit the record button and tweak, and it will record. Alright, so this is the spot that we would be expecting for something to happen. This is 8 bars from when we went into the breakdown section, or 16 bars from when we went into this section. So we're expecting something to happen here, but when we're arranging live with hardware, usually things don't happen on the bars. They happen a little bit early and a little bit late because we're just manually clicking in, and sometimes it's not always perfect. So to build a little bit of tension, I'm going to do it a little bit late on purpose and actually bring all the drums in here instead of bringing them in here. So let's extend these over, and I'm going to copy this. And don't get me wrong, this is all going to be the same. All the structure is going to be the same. I'm just going to be bringing in the drums late. So maybe we can take this out when the drums come in. And we're also going to be taking the vocals out when the drums come in as well. And let's copy over the kick drum, and then copy over these other drums and just extend these out here. Also, what I'm going to do is just bring all the drums in a little bit early, just 1/4 note early, except for the kick drum. And I'm also going to take out this open hat and leave this open hat in. So this hat will open up here, and we have this really big open hat here in the drop, and that's what I was saving it for. So let's have a listen to that. So this second open hat here really lifts the energy in this case. So let's automate these chords here now. I'm going to bring them in with a filter again. I think I'm going to go to a different filter mode and crank the drive a little bit as well. I am just going to record this filter movement in. Cool. So now we're building some good tension here. To make this drop hit a little bit harder when it comes in, I am going to mute everything else to turn off at this exact moment. So right now there is a little bit of ring out from the reverb tail. And I'm just going to mute or automate this mute switch here. So it just turns off. And the same with this one. Automate this so it turns off. So now with those mute switches automated, it sounds like this. Cool, and finally, some just finishing touches. I'm just gonna sporadically add some drums throughout the breakdown here. So just to build a little bit of tension, and maybe lengthen out these. And this one a little bit, and I'm also gonna extend this snare track out, so we have those playing. I've also forgotten to swing these snares here, so I'm just gonna do that now. Last but not least, taking advantage of some of the processing that we have on here. For example, on this track, we have this reverb, so why not automate it to come up right before here and then come back down? So maybe let's do the same thing and just record some automation in. And then at this drop point here, I'm just going to go into my automation and copy the automation from what it was and place that there. And what else can we automate? We also have the echo on here, so maybe we can automate that to come up just a little bit. And then we can automate it to come back down. And let's just have a listen to that now. So bringing in the drums late here is a really nice feel, and I really like that. It sounds quite old school and hardware-esque. Also, just all of the sampling I've done is very hardware and old school. The patch that I've used is very rave. The bass patch is a classic one as well. All of these drums are pretty much 909 besides the kick, which was analog as well. Really, it's a sound design, sound selection that makes this feel old school. It's also some of the sampling techniques and arrangement techniques. And we also have this saturation that this is going into, which is giving the drums a really nice sense of warmth. And this is our finished product. So I hope this has helped you to understand literally how simple these tracks are. It's all about getting these simple foundations correct and doing them well, not trying to overcomplicate things and make them too complex. So if you like this kind of stuff, I really do recommend you download the sample pack and try it out for yourself. And also like the video and subscribe if you want to. I really did have a lot of fun making this one. So until next time, thanks for hanging out and I'll see you then.